There's a lot of problems in the world today. Pandemics, foreign aggression, the border crisis, the national debt. There is virtually no area of public life in America that isn't facing a crisis. So we have to ask ourselves, in this world, does poetry even matter at all? Yes! These other problems are, if anything, completely insignificant to the problem of poetry. Now, in my last episode, I opened with a lament for poets, because the poet is perhaps the most forsaken creature on earth, alone, friendless, with holes in his pockets. The water pours through his shoes, and the stars through his soul. I stole that bit from Victor Hugo. It's a good line. But I don't know if you're aware of this. As hard as the life of the true poet is, the life of the non-poet is infinitely worse. He eats, he works, he mates, he sleeps. That's all, really. Without the muse to guide his life, he lives like an animal, no better than the beasts of the field.
They're throwing themselves into the road gladly, throwing themselves into the road to escape all its hideousness.
So, if you think that poetry can't solve all your problems, well, you're probably right. It probably won't solve any, in fact, but your spirit will be infinitely improved. You will be morally and aesthetically superior to the other wretches scrambling for status, fighting over their molehill. I am Andrew Benson Brown, and this is Classical Poets Live. Welcome to Classical Poets Live. As I said, I'm Andrew Benson Brown, your host, and member of the Society of Classical Poets, the world's largest organization devoted to formal poetry. We can be reached online at classicalpoets.org. Be sure to subscribe, follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Press like, leave a comment, and I'll appreciate it. And more than that, by subscribing, you'll be helping me work towards my goal of poetical world domination. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world, as Shelley said, but we're going to do one better. We're going to make them the acknowledged legislators of the world. And once that happens, we'll be able to solve all the country's problems. National debt, border crisis, all these things will simply melt away once a poet is at the helm. So if you would like to leave a comment about particular strategies for poetical world domination, please do so, and I will read it on the air. And now it's time for our fake poet segment. We have a very special fake poet for you today. One of the most famous fake poets of our time, in fact. And that is Amanda Gorman, inaugural poet for Joe Biden. Now, Gorman was in the news recently because her book, The Hill We Climb, was ostensibly banned from a school in Florida. And if you're wondering why it was banned, it wasn't for the reason that is obvious, which is the audacity of charging $9.99 for a book that is only 32 pages long. And most of that is not even her, it's not even the poem, it's just Oprah Winfrey's preface. So Penguin Random House really gouging you in that area. But anyway, since Ron DeSantis down in Florida passed the law that any parent can complain about the content of a school book, a mother came forward and complained about The Hill We Climb, that it was a hateful, racist book, and she wanted it removed from the school. Now the school decided not to remove it, but they did move it to another part of the library. They moved it from the elementary school section to the middle school section for older kids. And Amanda Gorman and her lackeys on social media had a fit about this. Gorman says, "I wrote The Hill We Climb so that all young people could see themselves in a historical moment. Robbing children of the chance to find their voices in literature is a violation of their right to free thought and free speech." So it's important to emphasize again the book wasn't actually banned. But Gorman spearheaded a movement to get Penguin Random House to actually sue the school. And if that weren't enough, legacy media groups like The Guardian dug up dirt on the mother who raised the complaint and brought to light some disreputable facts about her, like she had connections with the Proud Boys or something. So they smeared her character and sued the school, all because they just moved a book from one section of the library to another. This was not a statewide thing, it was not a countywide thing, it was just one school moving the book. Of course, I should point out that when the opposite is the case, when the left bans books, which they frequently do, they don't target the schools and they don't go through the law, they go for the distribution networks. These books just disappear from Amazon and from online bookstores. They go for the source, they go for the fountainhead, not the downstream meanderings. Even when there are laws in place to complain about crappy books, you still get canceled. Just to emphasize how bad this poem is, I wanted to point to an essay written by Adam Sedia. Now I'm going to be having Adam on the show today, so this dovetails nicely. Now his essay was published about a year ago now, and it's entitled, Why Amanda Gorman is Not a Poet. This was published on the Chained Muse website. I can't read the whole thing, but I will just excerpt it because it's very entertaining. Amanda Gorman became something of a phenomenon from the moment she read her poem, The Hill We Climb, amid the armed guards and a razor wire at the 2020 inauguration. Since then, she received book deals and a multi-million-dollar contract as a brand ambassador for Estee Lauder. I don't know if I said that right, I probably didn't. But beyond the glitz and celebrity is a woman who writes what we are told is poetry. Stripping away all the media attention, readers should be able to judge her work on its sheer merit. Reading that work for what it is, it becomes clear what it is not. Poetry. Sedia goes on to give several definitions of poetry by Shelley Poe, Matthew Arnold, Frost. And then he says that Gorman's work fails to even qualify as poetry, fails to live up to those definitions. He cites its complete absence of structural rigor and abundance of truisms and cliches, numbingly unpoetic language to, most fundamentally, lack of poetic metaphor. 53 lines that are actually just sentences arranged as lines. If you can see the screen here, you can see some of the lines. I'm not going to read them because presumably, if you're one of the 5 people who hasn't heard of this poem or didn't watch the inauguration, then you can go look it up. He says, then there is the issue of style. The language is strikingly prosaic, even bland. There is no use of poetic imagery or of simile or metaphor to evoke an idea with the presentation of an image. It is devoid of effusions of lush sensory description. Instead, the poem flatly states its ideas. It tells without showing. Gorman's poem not only lacks poetic metaphor, it is incapable of it. In the end, the poem is just prose, a series of declarative sentences stacked on top of each other, and not particularly brilliant or insightful prose at that. It is a campaign speech from a non-candidate, nothing more. She showcases her background, she establishes her credibility as a voice sufficiently unprivileged to warrant empathy, but then curiously uses it not to laud her country as a place where she could rise to such an honor, but to complain. She wants to be president, not just recite for one. And he concludes, the poem therefore is a failure on all levels, as a work of art, as an official statement, and as a ceremonial utterance. So this essay got really scathing comments, about 300 of them, in fact, a tidal wave, from total Gorman maniacs, or should we call them Gormaniacs, perhaps, who proceeded to just tear Sedia to pieces. They used a lot of ad hominem insults, they called him racist, etc. You know how this kind of thing goes. Kind of tried to smear his character like they did with the mom who spoke out against it. So we've reached a point in society where you're not even allowed to say that a bad poem is a bad poem. And if you just move the book in a school and put it on a different shelf, then you'll be sued and your character will be dragged through the dirt. But if you're the person who wrote the whiny poem, then you get a multi-million-dollar deal with a perfume company and you're lauded as some kind of hero. So this is why I've been saying that it's so important for traditional poets and artists to establish parallel institutions where we can compete with these mediocre maniacs. And that is exactly what I'm about to talk to Adam Sedia himself about.